Welcome to the Better Off Bonus Call of the Week. We're sponsored by Betterment, the largest independent online financial advisor. Remember, you've got two chances to get on the air with us every single week. We drop this particular episode on Tuesdays, the bonus call of the week. And then on Thursdays, when we have time, we'll put the listener question of the week after our interview. If you'd like to get on the air with us, do me a favor. Just send an email. Ask Jill at betteroffpodcast.com. That's askjill@betteroffpodcast.com. Today, we are talking to Russell. He is on the line from Las Vegas. Hi, Russell. Welcome to the show. What can we do for you?
Thanks, Jill. I have a question for you about passive fund investing.
Okay.
So my concern, I think, is a little bit antithetical to the reasons that you get involved in passive funds, but maybe you can help me out with it. So here's my issue. I love passive fund investing. All my investments, I believe, are passive index type funds through my 401k, HSA, and then I have a brokerage through Vanguard and Betterment. So over the next couple of weeks, I kind of want to look at the portfolio and the holdings inside these funds to see which companies comprise them. And I'm only speaking for myself. I know it's a little bit of a political issue. If I can help it, I prefer not to own stock in gun manufacturing companies. So if I get into these funds and see that those companies are in there, is there anything I can do about it?
Well, I mean, look, there's a couple of issues that you raise, and it's a great question. Thank you so much. We've been talking about this a lot, actually. I've been talking about this with Betterment, and we're going to probably do a whole episode on this because I think that more and more people are really starting to understand that there is something you may be able to do as an investor. Now, back in the 80s, we saw this same cycle when people really were forcing the hands of companies that were investing in South Africa under the apartheid regime, and that there was a divestiture movement. But it really amazingly started with some big institutions that said, we just don't want that. We don't want that in there. Of course, with a passive fund, it's a little bit more difficult because if there's a gun manufacturer that's in the S&P 500 and you own an S&P 500 fund, that makes it very hard. So if you have an index fund that has that, there's not much you can do except to say, you know what, I don't want to own that fund. I mean, you would have to check. I don't know, which exact funds you own, but you would have to then, sort of check in with each of these indexes to see whether you can screen those companies and see what you own and maybe replace it with an index that doesn't have that manufacturer in it. Now, that said, a lot of investors, when they were confronted with this in the 80s, or maybe even with tobacco companies, maybe even around war efforts, they didn't want to own companies that were involved in manufacturing bombs and things like that. They say, I don't want to own Raytheon. I don't want to own General Dynamics, right? So what they would end up doing is turn to social investing funds. Now, one of the earliest and one that still exists that I know of is called Domini. The woman who formed it, her name Amy Domini. You might want to check that out and look at whether their equity funds have those companies in it. And if they don't, maybe you have a good chance to supplement what you have. Maybe it's most of the index, but not the most offensive things that bug you. The problem with all of these social impact funds is that everybody's got a different cause. So because this issue is just coming to bear again in the national conversation, I wonder if maybe more and more of these firms are going to take a stand. But I think that may be something to consider. Tell me about the indexes that you do own right now.
Sure. So in my 401k, I have a Vanguard Target Fund. It's 2055 fund. That's 50% of my allocation, and the other 50% are all Vanguard too. I have a bond fund, which wouldn't apply, international fund, and then a large, medium, and small cap fund.
Mm-hmm. Have you looked at them yet?
No, I haven't. So no, I'm not sure. And I'm not even sure which gun manufacturers are even publicly traded.
That's easy. So that's an easier one to handle. And I don't know, have you been reading up the person who's been writing quite a bit about this is Andrew Ross Sorkin in the New York Times, because he's been talking about how he thinks that investors should not bail on these investments, but he thinks that investors should agitate and use their position to try to effect change. In other words, maybe you don't care that there's a gun manufacturer. Maybe you care that there's a gun manufacturer that makes, these assault rifles. I don't know. It depends, right? So I don't want to put words in your mouth. But, if you just think it's awful and you just don't want to own a gun manufacturer at all, that's one thing. I think that your question is one where you can just kind of Google any publicly traded gun manufacturers and see what they are. I mean, Smith & Wesson, I think, is probably the biggest one. There's all these ones that are like smaller ones that you probably wouldn't necessarily have in a mutual fund. I bet Smith & Wesson is the one that's probably in more of the funds that are out there. Remington, that's the other one. I couldn't remember that.
Right.
It's such an important issue, and I have to say it's extraordinary that you're thinking like this. Again, there's like the two different positions to take is like, I'm going to agitate to make sure that we vote our proxy and try to exert pressure, and the other is, I just don't want to deal with this. I'd rather not own it. So let me know what you find out, and good luck, and thank you so much for calling.
Yeah, and thanks. I hadn't heard of any of the author or the woman about the social investing, so I appreciate that.
All right, take care. Good luck. Okay, that's a wrap of our Better Off bonus question of the week. If you've got a question, it's simple. Send us an email at askjill@betteroffpodcast.com. We'll arrange to get you on. And don't forget, in just a couple of days, there's a brand new episode of the Better Off Podcast sponsored by Betterment. Talk to you then.